In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Grizzlies beat writer Drew Hill, joined as always by Chris Herrington, who is still in Memphis. We are lucky to have him here, gearing up for training camp, which begins next week for the Grizzlies. Monday, the 30th, will be Media Day. I know you're very excited for that. Do you have all your planned questions ready?
I do not. I think when we recorded last week, I said, I got a lot on my plate that's not Grizzlies. I got to get through it so I can pay attention to the Grizzlies. I'm still working on that process. I got two things I got to turn over today unrelated to the Grizzlies. And then I hope when I wake up tomorrow morning, I'll wake up refreshed and ready to start actively working on Grizzlies things beyond just running my mouth on the subject.
Yeah, I mean, you've got some research to do because we have to get ready for our predictions pod.
Yep.
I know you've been asked for predictions on Jeff's radio show basically every day over the entire summer.
Right.
So maybe you don't have to do all that much research, but yeah, I'm getting excited. I'm getting fired up for it. Today is Wednesday, and it marks the announcement of Ja 2, the Ja 2 basketball shoes. I wasn't going to start here. I was going to start with the Derrick Rose stuff, and we'll get to that. But you talked to Ja. I was in a wedding.
I did the Zoom. Yeah, I stepped in. I came off the bench. I did the Zoom call with Ja Morant. I can't, Jarrett something? Jarrett
Mann.
Yeah,
yes.
Jarrett Mann, the designer at Nike. Nice guys. Had a nice little, brief conversation. I listened to the description of the shoe stuff, but that I didn't really understand it, and I knew I would have the audio, and I'd probably give it to you anyway. But Ja, so I can't, the shoe construction, I don't know. You can speak to that maybe better than I can. Ja seemed in very good spirits. The vibes were good with Ja. It's the first time I'd interacted with him, I think, since the end of the season, because I had not, come across his path this summer.
I don't think anybody has since the end of the season. Yeah.
So it was a very nice conversation. I said, thanks for your time. I'll be pestering you again a week from Monday. And he smiled at that. And
he got a good laugh. He thought that was funny.
I think, all speed ahead. The shoes, as was the case with the Ja ones, shoe expert that I am, I think, there's just some good looking shoes. Yeah. They're not my style, but that doesn't matter. I think they'll be very successful.
You're not playing basketball these days, are you?
I am. I am back to playing basketball because there's the house that we live in St. Paul, Minnesota. I don't have to explain that anymore, I don't think. We have a basketball court at our neighborhood park, like 4 blocks away. And my son and I have been walking down and playing basketball, going one-on-one. Not only am I shooting a basketball, I am like playing, not like full court team, but I'm playing like real basketball for the first time in a long time.
Well, that's great. Well, maybe you do need a pair of the Ja 2s, because I know your game has got to be predicated on leaping ability.
I ain't thought about that. I am probably going to be in the market for some basketball shoes in the near future. I don't know if I can get away with the Ja's. I guess I could wear them in Minnesota. Who cares, right?
Yeah, who cares? And the first release is the purple sky. Kind of fits the Prince theme of Minnesota.
You joke about my game being based on leaping ability.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Your game's based on leaping ability,
my
quickness.
Game is based on not needing the paramedics at this point in my life. But I will say, peak of powers, my game was never based on leaping ability, but I was more of a slasher. I was not the hang out in the corner and shoot jump shots. I wasn't a good enough shooter for that. I had to get physical.
I'm not playing much basketball nowadays. I'm a golf guy now, but when I was younger, I was always like the tallest kid in my class. Like I grew early, so I was always the feet planted in the paint, center, Zach Edey, go up and set a screen and get a rebound and put the ball back in. That was me. That was my job when I was playing hoops.
I was similar. I only grew, I'm 6'3" now. I only grew 1 inch in high school. So I was 6'2" by the time I started high school. And I tended to be among the bigger guys I played with. So I was much more of a front court player, post player, slasher, rebounder kind of guy. Definitely.
So I definitely would not have needed the Ja 2s because, again, like, I know you're not much of a shoe guy, but this is a popular topic.
I care about my
Grizzlies
shoes.
Fans.
I just don't care about your shoes or Josh's shoes or Natalie's shoes or any other person's shoes.
Yeah. I get that. Although I got to say, when I came to Memphis, I didn't really have cool shoes. I had pretty much nothing along. I kind of had to remake my wardrobe.
This is what we would say about you early on. Before you would come into the podcast studio, Natalie and I would sit around and say, "Did you see Drew's shoes?
Used to joke that
These are lame."
Sane used to joke that we looked similar because I feel like when you're like breaking into the professional world, you're trying to dress nice. You know, you're trying to wear like
we had the ball cap, trim beard, backpack. You know,
we had that combo.
That situation.
Yeah,
right?
And I used to wear glasses as well since I've gone to the contacts. Yeah. No, I definitely see it.
Right.
But then once you're in basketball locker rooms as much as I am, I felt the pressure to expand the shoe rack in my home.
I appreciate that because I'm going to character assassinate a friend on the pod right now. My old buddy Peter Edmiston, who doesn't do it anymore, but used to be a radio host and wrote for the Athletic Some, and so he was around all the time for years. This dude, and I'm ragging him on the air about something I ragged him about in person. He would show up in the locker room like with flip flops on.
Yeah. See, no, I don't do the flip flops. Not to any basketball games. But I felt so now I probably have like 15 pairs of shoes, 14, 15 pairs of shoes. Like I got a good mix of shoes. And shoes are really popular. They are.
Yeah.
Not to get too far off of the Ja 2 train. I think what I learned from listening to your interview was that like they didn't change a whole lot about the bottom of these shoes.
Well, you would think if you spent, because I went back and read your story on the Ja 1 launch, you would think if you spent 18 months designing a shoe for the Ja 1s, you're not going to be able to do radically transform for Ja 2.
Right.
Hopefully you did a good job the first time around, right?
I would say that the silhouette itself appears to be more comfortable just from looks. I mean, I haven't put on Ja 2 shoes.
They look like they have more support, right?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's cool. I mean, I obviously, I love all the elements that go to his life. I think sometimes it's a little overblown, like the purple sky release. Like but like the tire,
the conceptual talk, right?
Yeah, but the tire track, like tread on the bottom is cool, to the nod to the tires in his backyard. Cause I've been there. I've seen those tires. It looks exactly like that. The names of his family on the shoes, like those are all nice touches.
Well,
I think.
What I'm particularly interested in, and what I think will have a greater bearing, I think, on the franchise, on the fan base, on just the sense of things is, and I asked them this question and they didn't really have a response to it. I didn't really expect them to, but what is going to come along with the shoe launch? Are we going to get more Nike commercials? Because there was going to be a whole big ad campaign that kind of got short-circuited because of the problems that he'd had, right? So to what degree are we going to get back to that kind of aggressive promotion? That I think is ultimately more meaningful probably for the franchise.
Well, and I think that they will because, I mean, this was something that came along with the Ja 1 launch and was repeated now for the Ja 2 launch, is that Ja's kind of the first Gen Z signature shoe athlete for Nike. And so they're trying to appeal to a young generation. They're also trying to appeal worldwide, not just here. And so that's why you saw the Chinese New Year Ja 1s come out and the trivia night with the names of games and all those bright colors and all that. That's to appeal to younger basketball players that they hope wear these shoes. And in order to do that, I think all the other stuff is going to have to come along with it as well. And so I do think it's really important that we have somebody as big as Ja in the city. We've never had a basketball player this big. And like these shoes are obviously a massive deal, not just here, but everywhere. And so it makes them, I think, an important piece of covering Ja Morant. Whether you're into shoes or not. Like, because there are lots of people that are into shoes.
I think the ad campaigns are designed to sell shoes, but they sell the player even more than they sell the shoe.
That's true. Yeah.
You don't have to ever wear a pair of Air Jordans to remember the Be Like Mike or, jingle or whatever, or the it's got to be the shoes with Spike Lee and all of that. It didn't matter whether you bought the shoes or not. That had to reach beyond the shoe consumer,
So you jumped in, you did the interview for me while I was taking wedding pictures. And then I came back and listened to the audio, and I found the most interesting piece to be when you asked about the launch of the Ja 2s coinciding with the return of Ja.
Yeah, and he was sort of reticent to make that connection, which I think is maybe to some degree revealing on its own, right?
But he put his flag down and saying the number one thing for me right now is getting back on the basketball court.
Right.
I found that to be very interesting. Now I couldn't see his facial expression as he was saying that.
Right.
But that's the inflection in his voice. That's what I got. Was like the number one thing for me is getting back on the basketball court and being Ja. I think that's the way he phrased it.
Right.
And I think that's the number one thing for everybody, right?
Absolutely.
If the shoes are just the exclamation point on what I've been calling like the reminder tour of, hey, I'm still here and I'm still an incredible basketball player, all the better. And I think that it's a win-win for everybody. It's a win for Ja. It's a win for Nike. And I think that would be fantastic. And so to me, I found that piece in particular to be very interesting.
Yeah, I guess what I was sort of getting at a little bit is to what degree, remember when he came back from suspension, was it the first time? Sort of, you wish you could memory hole that there were two of those, but he came back. Remember they had the t-shirts, I think they said redemption, or there was all this sort of trappings of almost like promoting the comeback kind of way. And I think the comeback, now it's a comeback from injury, not a comeback from the suspension. But I think the comeback is part of the story, the reasserting your place. It's a natural part of the story. We'll talk about it. We'll write about it. But to what degree will Ja talk about that? Will Nike try to embed that into the shoe stuff?
I think that they would be missing out on a massive opportunity if they didn't do that.
Right.
I think that's what everybody's going to be talking about as it relates to the Grizzlies. They weren't talking about it this summer. I think Ja is flying under the radar as much as Ja possibly can fly under the radar.
Right.
At this stage. But I think Nike would be dumb not to try to play that up a little bit. So the shoes obviously have a lot of people excited. I think if you can go on the sneakers app tomorrow, I don't know when this is going to post, but Thursday, the 26th, you can go on the sneakers app in the morning. There will be a lottery. You put your information in, you try to win. And if you win the lottery, then you pay the money and you get the shoes. And so that'll be the first way. And then in October, they'll hit retail stores and people will be able to get their hands on the Ja 2 sneakers. I think they look better than the Ja 1s, personally. They look a little bit more, they look like the playability of the shoe has increased.
Still, and I hadn't looked at when I did the interview, I had not yet had access to the online stuff to look at as close. The Ja 1s were mostly canvas, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you own them, I don't. They're mostly canvas, right?
Yes.
Are the Ja 2s mostly canvas, or has that changed a little bit?
They don't look like they're mostly canvas in the photos.
Okay.
There's some mesh to them. The Ja 1s, and when I was in Salt Lake City for the release of the Ja 1s, there was an opportunity to get a pair of those, and I've never put them on my feet, so I don't even know what they feel like. I can't really be wearing those as the Grizzlies beat writer. Right. I would never do that. But I can tell you from the people that were there,
canvas or mesh as opposed to smooth leather, right?
Yeah, it was. Yes. I think that's the better way of putting it. In terms of just the shoe, like I said, I think a lot of it has remained the same, at least from the technology on the bottom of the shoe. They've changed the style of it a little bit. They've added that mesh, and this is all I guess I don't know if this is more promotional talk, and all shoes are all basketball shoes are created equally, but they say that this design is for takeoff and landing, right? These shoes are made for people that are going to jump repeatedly over and over and over again, versus a maybe a different base in a shoe. There's all kinds of terminology that they've created for whatever mechanisms they have in the shoe. I don't think all of that is really all that important. It feels like a basketball shoe, I'm certain. But yeah, it's an exciting time for Ja, exciting time for fans and shoe collectors to try to get their hands on stuff like that. We did have some basketball news. Let's talk about Derrick Rose, but first let's take a break for a message from our sponsor.
Want to make a big impact without getting lost in a big system? Join Youth Villages to be a force for families while becoming part of one. Help make positive changes on a national scale, one community at a time. It takes a family to transform lives. Start with yours. Apply now at youthvillages.org/careers. Okay, so the Grizzlies agreed to a buyout. Wasn't much of a buyout based on reporting. But Derrick Rose is not going to be on the Memphis Grizzlies next year. This news comes right before the start of training camp. It's not ideal timing for the Grizzlies, which would lead you to believe that they did not see this coming.
Well, I think it would not have been ideal timing for the Grizzlies if they were paying any of the money. I think the fact that they're not paying any, I think it's great for the Grizzlies, honestly, unless the absence of Rose in the locker room is going to have, a negative effect, which that remains to be seen. I think the Grizzlies thought it had the positive effect, the desirable effect that they wanted when they signed him. And my sense is they were still happy with Rose as a part of the organization. But I also think that they were comfortable enough that if they didn't have Derrick Rose, they would not have been going out looking for him right now. I think the need for that, the perceived need for that was not the same now as it maybe was a year ago.
I still think the timing suggests they probably didn't really know that this was on.
Well, no, they didn't know it, maybe, yes. But I don't think from a basketball perspective, and I know there are people out there who just have different opinions of Derrick Rose based on the name. The reality is he was done. He was pretty much done.
Yep.
And so from a basketball perspective, being able to have that roster spot and the $3.5 million back to do other things with it, I think is actually good for the Grizzlies.
At this stage, where do they go from here as they go into training camp with now 2 open roster spots? And they'll eventually need to add somebody, but they don't have to quite yet.
Yeah, so my understanding is, so the max on an NBA roster, main roster, not the two ways, but the max you can carry is 15. And at a certain point in the season, and it's not opening night, but I think it's maybe like a couple weeks into the season. I haven't gone back to try to find this. But at a certain point in the season, you have to have at least 14. And so once you get at least a few weeks in the season, you don't have to carry 15, but you have to have 14. So right now they have 13. And so they're going to add a player to the main roster, if not before opening night, then soon thereafter. I don't think they need to do that today or do that on media day. I think, you can wait just in case, even if you know what you're going to do, and I suspect they do, you can wait until you have to do it just in case something happens, right? Some other injury or some other thing happens. But barring something unexpected, I think my assumption, I think your assumption, I think most people's assumption, maybe not most people. I think some people may look at this and say, go sign Markelle Fultz, go sign whatever free agent. I don't think that's what the Grizzlies are going to do. I think they are more than likely going to elevate Scottie Pippen Jr. onto the main roster. Instead of waiting for the 50 games, you got to fill the roster one way or the other. You might as well fill it with the guy you're going to ultimately fill it with anyway. So I think they're going to do that and then open up that 2-way to bring in another player. I don't think that they will look to fill both of the open spots anytime soon.
No, I mean, I don't think that makes sense for them to do. And I would add, if they were going to sign a veteran player into that spot, as you suggested, I don't think they would have used 2 second-round draft picks this year. It's just they had that opportunity to do it earlier.
Yeah. And you could argue that maybe they should have. I think at this point, based on who's out there, like Fultz would make some sense from a distance. The issue there, just from a talent standpoint and from a position standpoint, issue there is he's a non-shooting guard. And you already have John Morant, who's kind of a non-shooting guard, and Marcus Smart, who's, these are not Damian Lillard, right? You already have John Morant and Marcus Smart in your guard rotation. You don't need to add a ball handler who can't shoot and then pay him, multiple millions of dollars to do that. So I think because they obviously care about the tax, I don't know whether it's a hard line, we will not cross it under any circumstances this season, or just we're trying to avoid it. Either way, if they're trying not to cross that line, you don't need to add salary to your books that isn't going to help you on the floor. And so if they elevate, let's say, Pippen onto the main roster to be the 14th man on a minimum salary, essentially, they're still going to have several $1 million, $3 or $4 million under the tax line. And that gives them wiggle room. Yeah, they could elevate another two. They could elevate Cam Spencer or Jay Huff or whatever, and they may end up doing that. But they can also, it's a little wiggle room for a trade. It's wiggle room to sign a guy who's been bought out by another team later in the season who's not available now. And it's wiggle room in any capacity to react to problems that maybe don't currently exist. So as long as you feel okay with your rotation now, and there's no free agent out there who's going to be breaking into the rotation you already have, it makes sense to maintain that flexibility, both financially and roster flexibility, so that you can react to things that may happen in the season that you can't currently foresee.
Yeah. The other thing too is, and this isn't hugely important, but if you do end up elevating Scottie Pippen and then you have a two-way spot open, like if you wait into the preseason, then you'll get a look at some of the other players that are out there on training camp rosters that are getting into preseason games to have a look at who you might want to add as a third two-way player too.
Yeah, no, I've heard some people suggest, wait to get in the training, to your point, wait to get in the training camp, see who gets cut from other camps. But from the idea of you may want to sign those players to your main roster, I think it's more likely to be what you're saying, is that you elevate Pippen onto the main roster and somebody may pop out of one of these training camps you want to bring into the two-way. I do think that's more likely.
Yeah. So I'm with you. I do think they're going to elevate somebody before the start of the season. They have to, correct? What's the rules on that? Can they carry 13
I think
players
it may be. I think you may get a little bit of wiggle room into the season. I'm talking about a week or two.
Okay.
I don't think you have to be at 14 on opening night, but I think shortly thereafter you do. And so, but I think there's a good chance they do it by opening night.
Yeah, I would guess that. Let's see what Scotty looks like in the preseason too.
Right.
That's the other thing. Get him lots of run. Protect Ja. I'm very interested in seeing what it looks like. I talked to Keith Parrish about this briefly earlier this week. I don't think the loss of wasn't anticipating Derrick Rose playing a ton of minutes for this team anyway. But what do you make of just potentially elevating Scotty?
Well, I was slightly concerned about the prospect of Rose playing more than Pippen because he's Derrick Rose and because he's on the main roster. And I think I don't know that would have happened, but if that had happened, if there had been some pressure to do that for locker room and chemistry reasons or whatever, I'm not convinced that Derrick Rose, if he played this coming season, would be a better player than Scottie Pippen. In fact, I think it's likely he would not, especially when you factor in the reliability of the on-ball defense. I think you're going to get from Scottie Pippen every night that he's on the floor. And so, I think Pippen was set up to play a lot for the Grizzlies and to get onto the main roster at some point even before this happened. But now, I don't know, given what they've invested in Pippen and what they've seen from him, I don't know if there's a free agent on the market or anyone who's going to get cut out of a training camp who they would want more than him anyway.
Yeah, I know that he impressed in Summer League and at the end of the season in minutes that weren't really all that competitive. But we saw some of that from Santi before he became an NBA rotation player too.
Yeah.
And a little bit of that from John Conchar before he became an NBA rotation player. And so I do think that he's shown you enough that I feel confident that he's worthy of holding an NBA rotation spot.
I do think, to a point you brought up earlier, if you could get in a time machine and go back 3 months and that Derrick Rose is now on your roster, you have this spot, you have this money, I do think there's a case for going out and signing someone on the a free agent at that point to give you more of a veteran. But I just think that player's not out there anymore.
right
at this stage.
And maybe they did like somebody back then, but I don't know. Yeah, again, I just don't. I don't know if they would have done that anyway, based on the way that they handled the roster and the draft.
It is interesting, and I don't think we know the answer to this. And Derrick Rose has not put anything out there as we were recording. He was supposed to at some point this week. It was hinted. I still don't quite know like what exactly brought, because this was clearly a Derrick Rose decision, right? And so I don't know exactly what that's about or what brought it on. I mean, maybe he felt like he couldn't really help on the floor anymore. But Derrick Rose was not the only person on the NBA roster who was like a respected veteran who wasn't going to play a lot this season. Like
right.
There are lots of other guys like that.
There's lots of guys like that, yeah. No, I think you're right. There had to be some aha moment for Derrick Rose to say, look, I'm not going to do this. And like, I don't really want to speculate on what Derrick is going to do. Because,
I mean, I would have taken $3.5 million to hang out in the Grizzlies locker room. Like, I'll do it now.
Yeah.
You know, like sign me up.
For sure. I'll be a vibes guy. I'll go wave the towel on the bench and grab rebounds at practice. I'm happy to do that.
Right.
For $3.5 million? Heck yeah. But as I say, I don't want to speculate on what's next for Derrick Rose, but I think there's a lot of reading between the lines happening across Grizzlies online universe, and he has played more than 700 career games, 16 years in the league.
What it seems to not be is he's trying to get out of this contract and go sign with some other NBA team. There was some speculation about that initially by some people, and that is, I think, fairly clearly not the case.
There's been wonder about, like, can he be a coach? Could you bring him onto a coaching staff? Could you bring him into an organization? I wonder if he would do that with Tibbs, though. It doesn't, that feels like a Tibbs thing one day, Tom Thibodeau, because he played for him so much. That feels like that. If that was the plan, that's probably who we would go to first.
Well, the thing I wonder about, and again, we're in the realm of total idle speculation at this point, and I'm not going to speculate about anything. But the question that brought to my mind was his, he had moved to Memphis and rooted the family in Memphis.
Son plays on Ja's AAU team. Like, he seemed to be very happy here. So, I mean, again, you don't know what's, he'll determine what's next for him. But I do think.
Well, I just wonder if he's going to stay in Memphis, because you don't have, you don't have to. You can finish your basketball career and stay in Memphis, as other people have, right?
Yes.
Mike Miller did, Tony Allen did, etc.
So if this is it for D Rose, how will you remember D Rose as a basketball player?
I'm not really a Tiger basketball fan, so I remember that team, but I wasn't like gripped by it the way a lot of the city was. I grew up a Razorback fan or whatever. And so my association with him was going to be more like the early years and with the Bulls, the MVP season. Not that many players in basketball history have won the MVP award, and he is one of them. And very few have won that young, right? And so the season he had, I think at age 23, to lead a team to 60 wins and win an MVP. That's what I remember about Derrick Rose.
Yeah, he was kind of one of a kind, I think, when he was. My history doesn't quite go back as far as some others, but because I'm a little bit younger, but when I watched him, it was like there was nobody else in the league that played in the exact way that he did.
Right.
Because it was so explosive. He was so fast. It was just a really entertaining brand of basketball to watch. I think that's part of the reason why you immediately got a little bit of the Ja comparisons when he got into the league with that.
Rose and Westbrook, I can't remember which one was first or second, but Rose and Westbrook came out around the same time, and they did to get together seem to represent a new kind of point guard we hadn't quite seen before, in terms of that pure explosive athleticism. Yeah,
but and I mean, like off the floor, it's interesting because I think Ja has a ton of personality off the floor, but off the floor, Derrick, he was like so quiet and to himself, and like you had some ads, but really there wasn't much going on outside of basketball with him. And I remember when he made that buzzer beater in the playoffs. I can't remember who they were playing, and like the team is mobbing him, and like somebody's picking him up. I might have been Joakim Noah, like picking him up off the floor, and his face is just deadpan, just no emotion. Like that's kind of the type of player that he was. And so those were really fun years to watch. And I enjoyed watching those teams a lot. And as someone whose family is in Chicago, grew up a Bulls fan, like I remember those as some of the best years, watching the NBA. Part of the reason why I enjoyed the NBA was because of those teams. And you grow up in Kentucky, it's all college hoops, right? College hoops all the time. You're either a Kentucky fan or you're a Louisville fan. And the NBA kind of gets overlooked, and Derrick Rose was like one of the first players to pull me into the NBA. And I thought that was pretty cool. All right, last couple things. I was joking earlier about if you have your questions prepared, but what do you think we're going to be talking about on Monday at Media Day? What are you interested to know or learn?
The Media Day thing is I'm more intrigued by I wish we could actually see them practice, right? I'm more intrigued by trying to see basketball on the floor than what they're going to say at the podium. I think we'll get a little bit more about offensive philosophy maybe from Taylor Jenkins. I think there'll be a lot of talk about Zach Edey. We've already had sort of the advanced chirping of excitement from other players and people around the organization about Zach Edey. I think those are the main things, just trying to start, learning more about Edey and trying to tease out a little bit about how they're going to play. I don't think there's a lot. There are some small camp things I'm going to write about later this week in terms of playing time issues and some of that kind of stuff. But I don't think there's enormous intrigue on that front, are we going to get a sense of, are we going to get a confirmation that Marcus Smart will be a starter? Probably not. But no. I think even though he probably will be, I don't think they'll plant that flag on Media Day. What about you?
Yeah, I thought about that. I'm interested in just seeing Vince in the preseason too, and seeing Vince with the main group of guys out there, because to me, when you talk about ceiling this season, I think he's going to have an impact on it. If we were to ask what's going to determine how good the Grizzlies are next year, I think it is star health, it is Ja being Ja, it is Zach Edey, and I do think it is how the wings play. That's, to me, those are the most important things. And so I think the Vincent Marcus Smart thing is not going to go away for a while, I guess.
No, I agree. But I agree in terms of the tipping point thing. I agree that once you get past the top three guys, the stars, and them being healthy and maximizing the games they play together, which has been an issue over the years, that's clearly the most important thing. Once you get to that,
how good can Edey be right away?
Edey and Vince Williams, more so than, say, Marcus Smart and Brandon Clark, are going to be tipping point players, because there's a lot more variation about what you're going to get from them than there is, from Smart and Clark. And so, if you get the best possible outcomes from those two guys, that's going to be a huge boon to the team. If you get the worst possible outcomes, that's going to be a big problem. I do think those two players are going to determine a lot.
Yeah. And I wonder about Santi. I can't quit the Santi thing, because he's 7 feet tall. He looked really good in the Olympics. Played a totally different style in the Olympics. But he's 22 years old?
He's also still eligible for a contract extension, and it's been very quiet on that front, but that he'll be eligible for that up until opening night.
So I do wonder what he will look like as well. So it'll be good to talk to all of those guys for sure. And we're going to get a lot of talk about the injuries too. How's your finger, Marcus? And Ja, how's the shoulder? And I'm sure we'll learn some stuff as it relates to that as well. So exciting times coming up for the Memphis Grizzlies. And Chris and I will be there to cover it all next week. That's going to do it for us. Make sure you go read our stuff over at the Daily Memphian. Chris, why don't you tell everybody these non-Grizzlies projects that you've been working on?
Well, I did 2 stories this week, not really to preview, but connected to the Memphis Music Hall of Fame, which is inducting 9 new members this weekend as we speak. And so I did one story on Rhodes Chalmers Rhodes, who were, among other things, the backup singers for Al Green and all the classic Al Green hits in the 70s. And they're all still alive in their 70s and 80s. They're gonna be there at the event, but it's a classic Memphis music story. It's these 2 sisters who grew up playing in a country music family band on local television, and this guy who dropped out of college and at a Memphis State at age 19 to go hit the road and play saxophone for Jerry Lee Lewis. And then a few years later, they're Al Green's backup singers. And so it's sort of like only in Memphis, only in, the 1960s, 1970s in Memphis does something like that happen. So I did a big story on them. I think the biggest story anyone's ever done on them. And then I did another piece about this song called The Dark End of the Street that was a Memphis soul song from the late 60s that has been covered more than 50 times because I made a 50-song Spotify playlist for the story, but probably 100 times. I did a sort of a story about the origin and afterlife of that particular song. So I've been doing some other stuff too, but if you have any interest in music history, those are two pieces I've done this week.
Very cool. Make sure you go check that out. You can, like I said, you can go read about the Ja 2s over at the Daily Memphian. I'll tease now, if you play golf in Memphis, there's stuff coming to the website that you will definitely enjoy. So go check that out and go listen to the new, well, not new, but the Tigers podcast with the addition of John Martin. Which
a lot of news on that front lately.
A lot going on,
yeah.
Chris. A lot going on with that. I'm going to stay out of it. I know that's a sore subject. So hopefully the Grizzlies can be a bright spot,
right.
a bright spot in the next couple of weeks. All right. As always, thanks for listening. For Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.